All right.
All right. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. By the way, I brought some hardcover and copies of Confessions of an Undercover Agent with me in Whirlwind. Y'all can pass those around just to see what they're like. But if anybody's interested, I've got some of those.
Is this a picture of you on the front?
Yes, ma'am. My wife made me get a haircut last month. I look differently, don't I? Yeah, that is me on the front cover back when I worked undercover for 10 years. And it's a pleasure to be here today and be with everyone today. I was telling my wife on the way over here from Oxford that I remember when I was an MBN district commander and we were working on air smugglers. They were smuggling in plane loads of drugs from South America and the Caribbean. At one time, me and my agents came over here and there was a small motel on the old Highway 78. And it seems like there was a little small way station there, and a tanker truck. A tanker truck had come through and it had aviation fuel in it. And it didn't have the proper paperwork. So the wait station staff made them leave the truck there until they came back with the right paperwork. So they just parked it there and it stayed there for, I guess, about a week. But when we found out about it, we came over to Fulton because we had some information that maybe that truck, that tanker truck with aviation fuel, was linked to one of the large drug smuggling organizations, air smuggling organizations. So what we wanted to do was watch it, and whenever someone did pick it up, follow it. So we came over, and there, as I recall, there was a little small motel nearby.
Sands.
Yeah, that must have been it. And we got a couple, 2 or 3 rooms there. Must have been about a half dozen agents, and we stayed there for, I guess, 4 or 5 days, watching the truck. And of course, the motel is where we would sleep when we weren't out there watching. And finally, after about a week, someone came in with the paperwork and they picked it up and they left. But it turned out when they left, they drove it into Alabama. So what we did then, we were state agents, what we did then was just handed it off to the Alabama agents, you know, followed from there. I don't know what happened to it, but I was telling her I remember that, and I also remember when I worked undercover for those 10 years, and when I was infiltrating the Dixie Mafia auto theft rings around northeast Mississippi, that some of the people I worked on were in Lee-Itawamba County. And I remember riding undercover back with some of the career criminals to way at the back reaches of the county, I think up in the northern part of the county. And I had no idea where I was. You know, so far back in the woods, that kind of place where you get Monday night TV programs on Wednesday night. It takes so long to get there. But it was way back there, and I was telling my wife, I said, yeah, I remember dealing with a guy with one of their criminals, they called him Little Michaels. I wound up making a case on him and some others in this county over here. But it's a pleasure to be here, and on these books, I'm pleased with how well they have done. They've sold thousands of copies. And as Jeffrey told you, I also volunteered as a federal prosecutor from Oxford. I volunteered and served in Iraq, 3 tours for the U.S. Department of Justice, as he said. And as he recited, my work in Iraq was commended by the FBI director, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, by Britain's Minister of State for the Armed Forces. And my work in Iraq was also commended by the British ambassador. I used to think commendations like that in book sales, I used to think commendations like that mattered and meant something. But as Ellen remembers, when I went to the store in Oxford weeks ago to pick up groceries at Kroger, and I came home and I put them on the kitchen counter, the bags, and I turned away while she was taking the things out of the bags and putting them away, Well, behind me, I heard her say, and this is my wife, Ellen, by the way. And then I heard her say, behind me, the milk. And I said, what? She said, the milk. And I said, well, it should be in one of the bags. And she said, I don't see it. And I said, well, isn't it in a bag? No, I don't see the milk. And you didn't get the milk. And I said, yeah, it's in a bag. I don't see it, but it's got to be in one of those bags. No, you didn't. It's not here. You didn't get the milk. And I said, but, you didn't get the milk. And I said, but, I've been commended by the British ambassador. She said, I don't care. You didn't get the milk. So those commendations don't mean much day to day. And you still have to remember what you're supposed to pick up at the grocery store. No matter how many commendations you had or how many book sales, you still have to put out the trash can on trash day. You still have to pay full price, or in my case, senior price for a small cup of coffee somewhere. So those accommodations don't mean a whole lot. I was in a bar early in my undercover career, early in the 10 years I worked undercover. I was in a bar, and I infiltrated as an intelligence agent. I'd infiltrated rings of burglars and safecrackers. And their headquarters was a particular bar in Baton Rouge, where most of the criminals, career criminals, hung out. It was almost like their headquarters. And it was an early afternoon, and I was sitting on a bar stool with a burglar and a safecracker named Randy, and the burglar who also helped him named Candyman, and me. And we're sitting there, we're drinking beer, and while we're drinking a beer, Randy, the safecracker, says, hey, let me show you something. He reaches under his shirt, and he pulls out a .38 pistol. And it was like this pistol that I'm holding there, except it was blue steel instead of chrome. And he pulled it out under the counter and said, I got it last night. And he passed it to Candyman, sit between us, and Candyman looked it over, and he passed it to me. And I looked it over, and I was thinking, more than likely it's stolen. It may have been used in crimes. It may, he may be using them in crimes in the future. It'd be good if I could see the serial number on the gun. Because if I could see the serial number, I could look at it and look at that and remember it and write it down in my intelligence report. And then later on, whenever we weren't concerned about my cover being blown, that information could be used probably in a case. But I couldn't see in the dim light of the bar, even though it was afternoon. I couldn't see the serial number because it's too dim in there. So when I looked at it, I said, hey, Randy, hey, I could use this. How about if I get it back to you tomorrow? And I slipped it in my pocket, thinking, that way, once I left the bar, I'd be able to see the serial number, write it down, give it back to him the next day. Boy, as soon as I put it in my pocket, though, Randy all of a sudden became enraged. Hey, give my gun back. Candyman sitting between us said, give him his gun back, give him the gun back. Randy, give it back, Mike, give it back, Mike. I was using the name Mike then. Give it back, Mike. And I said, hey, I can use it. I'll give it back tomorrow. I took a drink of my beer. And all of a sudden, in my side, where Candyman was sitting between us, I felt something sticking in my right side. And I looked. It was a gun. And Candyman had taken his gun and had it stuck in my side. And his finger was on the trigger. He had a revolver like that. He said, give it back, Mike. Boy, they were enraged. And I thought, well, and I was thinking like this, but I was thinking, well, even though it's their headquarters, no one's going to shoot me in here. Not in the middle of the day, they won't shoot me in here. And I said, hey, I'll give it back tomorrow. And I went to take another drink, and as I went to take a drink of my beer, I heard click. Click. When you pull the hammer back on a revolver, it clicks. Yeah, and it's cocked back, and it doesn't make hardly any noise at all. But when it's stuck in your side, when it's stuck in your side, you can hear it click. I heard that loud and clear, and I looked down, and the hammer was cocked all the way back in his finger was on the trigger. And I thought, oh, God, I hope he won't shoot me. Because, that changed it. I hope he won't shoot me. But you know what I was worried about? I still wasn't as worried about him intentionally pulling the trigger as I was about the gun accidentally going off. Because those of you who know about guns and revolvers, once they're cocked, how much pressure does it take on that trigger? You're right, it doesn't take much. Just a little pressure on that trigger and that hammer slams on. Pow! And I could just imagine that happening and the bullet busting through my side and my guts being shot all over the floor. So I was afraid to go off accidentally, and I was praying, don't sneeze, don't hiccup, don't have a spasm, don't anybody come walking by and just happen to bump him as they're passing by, because I was afraid that because that gun would go off so easy. And I said, oh man, well, wait a minute. And I looked at Candyman, I looked at him close, and all of a sudden his eyes glazed over, and I thought, like cold dead fish, and I thought, darn, he might even intentionally do it, but I was still more afraid of it going off in my side. So I said, wait, man, I'll give it back. So I didn't want to move too fast. I didn't want to make any jerking motions because he might just jerk himself. So I said, I'll give it back, and real slowly I reached in my pocket, I pulled the gun out, and I handed it past him to Randy. And I moved my hand back, and the whole time Candyman kept the gun stuck in my side. But now came the most dangerous part. He uncocked it. But he uncocked it with it still in my side. And how do you uncock a revolver that's cocked? Yeah, you pull the trigger. And you put your thumb, for those of you who haven't done it, you put your thumb on the hammer back here, which is cocked all the way back and real strong. And then you try to hold that back with your thumb, and you pull the trigger, and it would slam down and shoot. But with your thumb on it, you're trying to hold it back. And you're trying to let it down slowly. Because if you let it down too fast, bam, it shoots. And I say try to hold the hammer back, because sometimes it'll slip, pow, and shoot. I was telling this to my neighbor, who's a firearms instructor. And he said, yeah. He said, I've had revolvers go off twice in my hand when I was uncocking them for the people I was training. And no matter how experienced you are or how many times you've done it, there's the possibility it might slip and go off. So he uncocked it with it in my side. And you can imagine when he did that, which it probably took maybe 3 seconds to let that hammer all the way down. But during that 3 seconds, my insides twisted, I froze. And as I've told folks before, for those 3 seconds, I wasn't part of this world, this normal world. All of us are part of this walking, talking, breathing world. Those 3 seconds were gone. And you know what? Those 3 seconds, let me tell you how long they felt. Sitting here with you right now, us just talking, 3 seconds goes by pretty quickly, doesn't it? If you go to the dentist and they're drilling the tooth for 3 seconds, those 3 seconds last a lot longer, doesn't it? And those 3 seconds of him uncocking the gun in my side lasted a long time too. So thank goodness he finally got it, and then we were all friends again, although they were lethal and deadly friends. And I continued working on them undercover. But I learned, that was early in my undercover career, and I learned a very, very important lesson about criminals from that. I learned that criminals don't practice firearm safety. And I was telling somebody, we need to have a training course for criminals in firearm safety because they sure didn't practice it. But I've written about that. I wrote about that in Confessions of an Undercover Agent. And I wrote about some other times when unfortunately criminals did not practice firearm safety. And close calls, you know, especially like going in to do some kind of drug deal or whatever, and it turns out it was someone I'd arrested a year before using another name, and they turn around and see me, and there are other people around, and so those things can happen. I was going to buy 1 ounce of heroin from a drug dealer named Junior. 1 ounce of heroin, and I think it was for $800, as I recall. I wrote about this in Confessions of an Undercover Agent. I was going to buy the 1 ounce of heroin from him in the middle of the afternoon. But this time, instead of just buying the drugs, and then later on, months later, we have a roundup where he's arrested along with others that have sold me drugs. This time, I told the investigators who were working surface topside, I told them, look, I want you to come in during the drug deal and arrest Junior right in the middle of the deal and pretend to arrest me so I could keep my cover with his group for a little while longer. So rush in, arrest him, pretend to arrest me at the same time during the deal. And I was wearing a wire, a body transmitter. And the little transmitter is tucked under my shirt here, and there's a wire under my shirt running up here, and it's taped to my chest with surgical tape, which always pulls the hair off your chest. And I take it off and I scream and yell. And it's going up here to where the end is, the little mic, and the mic, you know, with a little tape, the mic is right here in the hollow of your shoulder, which is the place to be because it picks me up talking with somebody else I'm talking with. So anyway, I'm wearing the wire, and I'm in my undercover car. I'm riding down to meet Junior, and the investigators are all set up in the area to, you know, watch it and come in at the right time, and they're listening to the wire over their receiver. And on my way to, as I was leaving to meet with Junior, I found out that the investigators at the last minute had called in uniformed police officers to help out with the arrest. But in order to preserve my cover, they didn't tell the uniformed police officers that I was the police, that I was the heat. So the uniformed officers thought they were going to be helping arrest 2 heroin dealers in the middle of a heroin deal. And as I was driving down to meet Junior, I was starting to worry because I was thinking, God, I hope nothing goes wrong. Because if it does, those uniformed officers will riddle the car me and Junior's in and everyone's in that's in it. So I hope nothing goes wrong. So I'm driving down. There's Junior. He's parked on the street facing some apartments, and I park next to him. I get out of my car, and before I did, I took my gun, that gun, and I slipped it under the driver's seat of my car because I thought, well, they'll be arresting me too. It'll just probably get in the way, so no need to have my gun. So I got out with my gun in my car, and I got in Junior's car, and I sat in the passenger seat. And as I got in the car with Junior, he's sitting there, the engine's off, and he's behind the steering wheel. And as I get in, he looks me over real close. I mean, he scrutinizes me. He just does it real quickly like that, too. And then he does this. He's sitting behind the steering wheel. He does this. You know, I'm sitting over here. He does this. His eyes are big, and his head keeps swiveling all around. He's watching everything that's happening. And he's suspicious. He's suspicious. He's nervous. He's hyper. He's wired. He's jumpy. And he's like this. And in his right hand was a gun. And his finger was on the trigger. He's like this. Well, when I saw that, I was like this. Or I wanted to be, but of course when you're working undercover, you've got to force those things down. But what do I need to do? What do I need to do? He's got a gun, he's like this. What do I need to do? I'm wearing the wire. I need to let the investigators who are listening know that he's got a gun, because it'd be more dangerous. So I say, gun? Why you got a gun? Man, you don't need a gun. And I've got to say it loud, because sometimes wires don't always work. And sometimes they go in and out on transmitting. And sometimes there's a lot of static. So that's why I have to say it loud, gun. And I have to say it several times just to make sure they hear gun. So that's why I said, gun, why you got a gun? Man, you don't need a gun. What I wanted to say though was, gun, why you got a gun? Man, you don't need a gun. Of course, as you know, he might have been a little suspicious of me yelling at my shoulder where the mic was, right? So he's like this. Somebody came out of the apartment. He's like that. Cat jumped up behind a dumpster. He's like this. Car rattled slowly past us from behind. He's like this. And I'm thinking, gosh, he's going to blow somebody away, you know. We need to get this deal on. I said, hey, man, you got the smack? Got the smack? You know, heroin, got the smack? He doesn't hear me because it's like this. Focusing. I said, man, the smack, you got it? Yeah, I got it, yeah. So he reaches in his pocket with his left hand, still holding the gun. He pulls out a baggie that's got about an ounce of tan powder in it. That's the heroin. He hands it to me. And then he's like this, and I'll look it over. It's the ounce of heroin. I say, hey, man, 800. He doesn't hear me because he's like this. I say, 800, right? 800. Yeah, 800. And he's almost yelling. And the tension in that car is, I mean, it is thick and high. It's almost like electricity sparkling in that car. And he's yelling when he's talking to me. You know, in this frantic, panic voice. And your natural inclination is to be the same way back. But I've got to keep my voice calm, because if I'm not calmer, it's going to make him even worse. I say, okay, man, okay. And I pull out 800 cash, a flash roll. As I pull it out, I'm thinking, time to get this arrest done. And I told the investigators beforehand, I said, here's the code word for the arrest. When you hear me say this word, rush in like gangbusters and arrest him and pretend to arrest me like gangbusters. And the word was coke. Coke, you know, for cocaine. So I take out the $800 and I say, hey man, can you give me some coke? Because if you can give me some coke, I'd really like to get some coke. And I've got to say it loud, and I've got to say it several times, right? And what I wanted to say was, hey man, can you give me coke, coke? Somebody give me coke! About the third time, I said the word coke. Junior and I were in the middle of this deafening racetrack. Car engines on both sides were roaring. Tires were squealing. Smoke was burning from the rubber. And police cars with flashing lights were roaring, racing down at us from both sides, lights flashing. They're zooming at us. And as they did, Junior, with his gun and his finger on the trigger, jerked his arm up toward his open window with the gun to start shooting at the police rushing in from that way. And he was getting ready to shoot. And he was doing it quickly. And time was flashing by. And as he did that, still trying to maintain my cover, I grabbed his arm and said, no man, don't! And he jerked it away. And when he jerked it away again, those thoughts through my mind are going by in microseconds like this. He's going to shoot. I've got to stop him. If I can't stop him, I've got to jump on him and wrestle him. You know, and that's happening like this. So as he jerks up to shoot again, I grab his arm one more time and say, don't man, that'd be murder. And then he stops. He throws down the gun and he grabs the dope, you know, that I had, and throws it out the window. And right after that happened, all of a sudden, hands up, hands up, hands up! And on my side of the car were two uniformed officers. with their .357 Magnums, and their fingers were on the trigger. And they were a few feet away, pointing at my head, 2 guns. Hands up, and I go! And I'm trying not to move. And the head, look, if we'd been in a convertible, my fingers probably would have gone through the roof. And I'm trying not to even look at them. Hands up! And I'm like this. And on the other side of the car, one of the investigators or officers on the other side of the car yelled, "Gun! They got a gun!" You know, it's the gun Junior had toned down. Gun! And boy, when he yelled that, the 2 officers, they got flushed and their eyes were big, and I couldn't see their fingers tighten on the trigger, but I swear, I know they were tightening on the trigger. They were really flushed then. Hands up! Oh, and I'm trying not to move. And of course, back then I was like this, and I was saying, hair don't move, don't move, try not to, I don't even want to look at it. And they're yelling, hands up. And then one of the 2 officers yelled, get out of the car. And I'm thinking, I can't do this fast. If all of a sudden I do this, they'll pull the trigger. If I go too slow, they'll think I'm not doing what he said. I got to do this just the right speed because the guns are pointing in my head. Their fingers on the trigger. I'm a heroin dealer. There's a gun. I'm a danger to them. So I've got to do this just right. I'm trying to do it deliberately. Get out of the car. So I start doing this. And he's yelling, get out of the car. And I'm doing that. And as I'm doing that, the one right beside him yelled, hands up. I said, hands up. Oh, and I started doing that. And the one beside him yelled, I said, get out of the car. And I go, ooh, hands up, get out of the car. And I'm going, oh my God, they're going to shoot me. And they both, I was a danger to them. So their adrenaline was pumping, and they both had tunnel vision. And they both had tunnel hearing where they weren't hearing each other yelling different things. All they knew was the one that kept yelling, hands up, saw me lowering my hand all the time. And the one yelling, get out of the car, saw me not getting out of the car. And I was, oh my God, they're going to kill me, hands up, get out of here. I'm doing, oh, my sweat's breaking out, oh, I'm not going to make it home, oh. And about that time, an investigator ran around, opened my door and grabbed me. And he jerked me out of the car, and he slammed me against the car several times to make it look good. Bam! 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 And it never felt so good. Bam! Bam! To be manhandled by the police. Oh, thank goodness. And then they put the cuffs on, and they put those on too tight. But that's okay. I was breathing and alive. And they put me in the back of the investigator's car and drove off like they were taking me to jail. Woo! Woo! I wrote about that in Confessions of an Undercover Agent. And I think at the end of that chapter, I wrote something like this, that it had been a good day. I hadn't got shot by a heroin dealer, and I didn't get shot by the police, so it was a good day. A day in the life of an undercover agent. 10 years of that. And of course, working 10 years undercover did not affect me at all. Not one single bit. Well, that was me and Junior. My wife has heard this same stories many times. And one she always hears too is my favorite story in the book, and she's heard this every time. About me and a female Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics agent named Sarah Neal, who's a good friend of ours. And Sarah and I had worked undercover in Jackson for about 4 months, infiltrating heroin dealers. And then when we finished that operation working together, I went to South Mississippi to the coast. I went to the coast and started driving a cab as a cover to start infiltrating the heroin trafficking rings from New Orleans to Mobile and all along the coast. Sarah went to Brookhaven, Mississippi, and she got an apartment, started working in that area. While she was down in Brookhaven, tell her I'll remember the milk. That's probably my wife calling and telling me to get the milk. She went to Brookhaven, and while she was in Brookhaven, another MBN agent, Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics agent, who was working undercover in Columbus, called her and asked her to come up and help him on a heroin buy bus you know, like I did with Junior. And he told Sarah, look, I just need you to come up. We're going to do a deal for 4 ounces of heroin with this guy, and when we do it, we'll pull out our guns, and the agents on surveillance pull out their guns, arrest him, but I need to make it look cool. Will you come up and go with me on this? So Sarah, it was on a Sunday. Sarah got up early, drove 210 miles from Brookhaven to Columbus, and she met with the agent. His name was Jerry Devon, and the other agents who were going to do surveillance, watching. And the heroin dealer, his name was Johnny Ray. The heroin dealer had told the agent, just drive outside of Columbus about 12 or 15 miles on this such and such county road, little small county road, about 12 or 15 miles till you see my car parked on the shoulder of the road. And when you see that, you park on the shoulder of the road right on the other side, and we'll meet right in the middle of the road, and we'll do the drug deal right in the middle of the road. And don't worry, don't worry. There are no houses anywhere around. No one, hardly anyone ever uses that road. And where I'll be, you can see for about a mile flat in each direction. So if we see any cars happen to come, and it's unlikely we will, we'll have more than enough time, you know, to stop what we're doing, and they'll never see what we're doing. So it's like being isolated on the moon. So that day, Sarah Neal, female undercover agent, and Jerry, drove in the undercover car out that county road. And the other agents tried to follow them. But because the road was flat and all that, the other cars had to stay way back out of sight. So the 2 undercover agents were pretty much on their own. And as they drove out, they saw the heroin dealer's car, Johnny Ray's car. And so they parked on the other shoulder of the road, the little narrow road. And the male agent, Jerry, got out and met Johnny Ray in the middle of the road. Sarah Neal stayed in the passenger seat of the undercover car. While they were out there, the undercover agent pulled out $10,000 in cash, which was the flash roll for the heroin. And the heroin dealer pulled out the 4 ounces of heroin and handed it to him. And when he did, the agent reached back, pulled out his gun and yelled, "Police, MBN, you're under arrest. Hands up, you're under arrest." When the agent did that, on the heroin dealer's side of the road, where the heroin dealer's car was parked on the shoulder, there was a field. And 70 yards away in a tree line was the heroin dealer's brother, Jimmy Ray. And Jimmy Ray had a high-powered rifle, .30 caliber rifle. And he had the agent in his sights. And he had his finger on the trigger. And when the agent yelled, "Hands up, police, hands up, you're under arrest, the man pulled the trigger, pow, and the agent got hit. The man in the tree line fired again, pow, pow, kept shooting, and the agent was staggered in the road. And he couldn't see where the guy was in the tree line, but he could tell the shooting was coming from the tree line. So he started just blindly firing his pistol toward the tree line. Pow, pow. And meanwhile, the guy in the tree line kept firing at him. Pow! Sarah Neal was on the other side of the road in the passenger seat of the undercover car. For her to be safe, all she had to do was just squat down on the floorboard or get out of the car and squat down behind the front of the car where the motor was. She'd be in relative safety. But she didn't do that because she saw her fellow agent wounded, and being attacked in the road. And Sarah Neal, without hesitating, jumped out of the car with her Model 65-shot 38, exactly like the one I'm holding here. She jumped out of the car and ran around the front of the car into the road where the agent was, and as she ran toward the agent, pow, he got hit a second time. Dropped down to a knee and staggered back up. And as Sarah ran to him with her gun, she came under fire. And as she ran toward the agent, the drug dealer in the road with the agent went for his gun. And when he did, Sarah popped off a shot, pow, and it got the guy in the hand. And as Sarah got to Jerry Denton, the agent who was wounded twice, just as she got to him, he got hit again, pow! And he had been hit 3 times by the rifle fire. The man shooting at her and Jerry. She tugged Jerry, wounded, to her side of the road, and they tumbled down an embankment. And they sprawled out at the bottom. And Sarah scrambled up on her knees with her gun, watching the skyline where the road was for the bad guys. She looked over at Jerry, the agent who was wounded. He was sprawled out on his back. And she saw he was covered with blood. Covered with blood. And she thought, if I don't get him to a hospital right away, he's going to die. I've got to get him to a hospital right away or he'll die. That's the thought that jumped in her mind right away. So without hesitating, what she did was she scrunched over him and she started tugging him up. And she got him to his feet. And she's still holding on to her gun too. And she started tugging him up that embankment. Because she's thinking, I've got to get him to the hospital or he's going to die. And she's tugging him up the embankment, even though that's where the bad guys are. And she wants to save this agent. So she tugs him up. And when she gets to the top, the bad guys are gone. She doesn't see them anywhere around. So she gets Jerry, and she's covered with his blood, too. She gets him over to the undercover car and gets him in the back seat. He lays down in the back seat of the car, and about that time, the other agents who had been on surveillance, they reached the scene. And they started fanning out in cars and on foot looking for the bad guys. And Sarah, with the wounded agent in the back seat, raced into Columbus. She found the hospital. And she got him to the emergency room. And she got him into the emergency room. The emergency rooms then weren't equipped like they are now. The only medical person right then, at that moment, in the emergency room was a nurse's aide. And the nurse's aide said, here, put him in on this examining table in this room. I'll go see if there's a doctor in the hospital. And the nurse's aide left. And Sarah was there with Jerry bleeding and moaning, bleeding and moaning. And a couple minutes passed. And a nurse came, an older nurse came in and said, to look and say, what is it? What is it? We're trying to find a doctor. And Sarah said when she looked at Jerry and how bloody he was, she said it looked like the nurse was about to faint. Then the nurse left to go try to find a doctor. And Sarah was there still holding Jerry, and then she heard hollering and yelling. Hollering and yelling. And she stepped out of that room and she looked, and it was at the entrance to the emergency room. Somebody was coming in yelling and hollering, my hand, my hand, my hand hurts, help, my hand. Yes, it was the one she'd shot, the drug dealer she'd shot, going for his, my hand, help. So Sarah stepped back into the room, reached into her purse, and she got her gun and handcuffs. And she stepped back out and she arrested him. Yeah, she arrested him right there in the emergency room, and she had him get down on his stomach. And she knelt down behind him, and she started pulling his hands behind him to handcuff him. And as she was doing that, he yelled, don't put him on too tight, it hurts too bad, don't put him on too tight. So she made sure she put him on a tad too tight. And as she's kneeling over the guy she's handcuffing, there's only one person around. There's an elderly gentleman sitting there in the waiting room, which was right there, too. And he's sitting there looking at this with big eyes like it's a movie. And she says, Mister, as she's kneeling over the guy, Mister, would you watch him? I need to get back to my agent in there. Would you watch him? If he moves just a hair, will you yell out? Will you do that? Yes, ma'am. Well, you can imagine all this happening. So she gets back in there to Jerry. They rounded up a doctor, and Jerry Gedlin underwent the first of 5 surgeries. All this happened somewhere maybe around 1 in the afternoon. It was on a Sunday. At times there was a little sleet coming down, cold weather. It was a Sunday before Thanksgiving. A little sleet coming down every now and then. Sometimes a little foggy outside. Sarah stayed in the hospital all that day. Of course, agents from around the state flooded in, as you can imagine. And she was at the hospital all day. And finally, about midnight, a little after midnight, agents convinced her to leave and go find a motel room. You know, she thought she was going back to Brookhaven that same day after the deal was over. But here she was still there at midnight, and convinced her to go find a room and get some rest. So she left the hospital, and when she did, she had to scrape ice off the windshield of the Undercover car. Jerry Devlin's blood was all over the back seat, all over her clothes. And she got in the Undercover car after scraping ice off, and she drove into downtown Columbus to the Holiday Inn, which is now some other motel name. And it was after midnight. All the stores were closed. No other cars were on the street. No living human being was anywhere around. Just darkness, a little sleet coming down every now and then. Her windshield wipers going. And she finally gets to the Holiday Inn. Hardly anybody staying there that night. They put her in a block of back rooms. And she gets in, she double locks the doors, pulls the curtain. And then she took a shower. Of course, not only clean up, but to thaw out, maybe get a little tension out if she could. And she took her gun with her into the bathroom because the shooter with the rifle still had not been captured. And she was a little spooked because obviously he had dropped off the other guy at the hospital. So she took her gun to the bathroom with her. After a shower, she was on the phone in the room. She had to talk with the other agents back at the hospital and everywhere. With things like this happening, people always want reports. They want this, they want that. So finally, she finally gets in bed a little after 2 in the morning. And remember, she got up early that morning, real early, in Brookhaven. And left early, drove 200 miles, went through all this, and been up all day. And then it's 2 in the morning, she finally gets in bed. Well, if that had been you, if that had happened to you, would you just drop off into a sound, contented, relaxed sleep? Well, she couldn't either. She was trying to sleep, but you know, the mind was just spinning with this blur of events that had happened during the day. Finally, about a half an hour before daylight, she finally drifted off into an exhausted sleep. And at daylight, a half an hour later, the phone woke her beside the bed. And it was an agent at the hospital. And he said, "Sarah, I've been up and awake all night with Jerry Devlin, the wounded agent. Can you come and relieve me?" Sarah got up and got dressed. But the only clothes she had were those she had worn the day before. So she put on jeans that had blood all over them. She put on a blouse that had the agent's blood on it. She put on a jacket she had worn that had blood on it. And she went back up to the hospital. And she stayed all day. Sometimes writing reports, sometimes talk with other agents, with Jerry, and sometimes just trying to stay away. And finally, about 8 o'clock that night, she left Columbus, driving back to Brookhaven, and that's 210 miles. And back then, that was close to a 4-hour drive because it was on back roads. And that whole way, 4 hours, she was fighting to stay awake. And she was still wearing those bloody clothes. Isn't that a powerful story? Isn't that a powerful story? You can see why that's my favorite. A powerful story about courage, dedication, sacrifice. What a story. And you know what she did the next day after she got to Brookhaven? The next day she got up and went back to work as an MBN agent. That year, Parade magazine, some of you my age might recall, there used to be a magazine called Parade magazine in Sunday newspapers. And it was the Sunday supplement in newspaper, nearly every single newspaper across the country, Parade magazine. That year, Parade magazine chose Sarah Neal as one of the 10 outstanding law enforcement officers in the country, federal, state, and local. And her picture was on the cover along with the other 9. And later they flew her and the others out to Los Angeles for an award ceremony. I like the fact that I'm able to write about that story because I'm able to tell details people just never knew. And a lot of people never caught the news about it at the time. And also a lot of details, you know, about her having to wear the same bloody clothes. When I was writing the story and she and I were talking, she just happened to mention that. And I said, what? Wait, tell me about all that. Tell me about all that. To me, that's one of my favorite stories in the book. And one of the reasons why is not only because I know the agents and their friends, is because to me, Jerry Devlin was also courageous in that shooting back while he was still wounded badly. And Sarah Neal, to me, those are the type of law enforcement officers we have out there today, protecting our communities, federal, state, and local. People with the same kind of dedication and courage as Jerry Devlin and Sarah Neal. The only difference now is nowadays, law enforcement officers out there nowadays protecting us are better trained now. And those 2 agents were highly trained, but people are even better trained nowadays. So thank goodness we've got people like that protecting our communities. And you can see why that's my favorite story. I'm taking up too much time. I'll be glad to take any questions, and if you have any questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
Did you know James Grisham?
I'm sorry, who?
John Grisham.
John who?
Grisham?
No, ma'am, but I'm thinking of changing my name to Charlie Grisham.
His friends.
Yeah, I've met him once or twice, but I don't know it. But I am thinking Charlie Grisham. That sounds familiar. Might get more books there.
What years did you work against the Dixie Mafia?
Oh, that was 79 and let's see, 78 and 79 from Tupelo up to Corinth,
Yeah,
and sometimes across the line and over to Alabama.
Right.
Yeah, where everything was centered.
Yeah, I'm originally from Corinth. I used to call Corinth Little Chicago because of.
Well, yeah, in fact, when I was undercover, I wrote about that. When I was undercover there, I went to the Edens, and remember one of the Edens had I think he had a honky-tonk or somewhere the old man Eden or whatever. And for my cover, as a career criminal, I went to him and offered to sell him a tractor trailer load of stolen, I think what it was, of stolen washing machines and dryers. They'd been shipped from the plant. I told him we'd ripped off a whole trailer load. And I knew he wouldn't buy it because I was telling him, well, we can't let just some go. We want somebody to buy all of it. But anyway, I figured that'd be good for my cover. But yeah, people around that area like Wayne Robinson and his brother, Dean Hill, I forget some of the other outlaws around there, and going out to Jumpertown. In fact, I wrote about how some of the criminals told me they had all these guns they wanted to sell me they had gotten from a burglary. They committed a burglary of someone who was a gun collector, and they had about 30-something weapons, real high value, high priced weapons. And they took me out to Jumpertown and showed me where they had it hidden in the barn. And anyway, in fact, one of those guys, they took me out one night while we were riding, and they showed me where one of them's grandfather lived. And what they wanted me to do was arm rob the grandfather at his house, because they knew that he had a safe with maybe up to $100,000 in illegal money, because he was a criminal too. And they couldn't do it even with ski masks because he'd recognize them, but they wanted me to rock it. Anyway, they were nice folks, huh?
Yeah.
Do you know Buford Pusser? Did you meet him?
No, he was killed before I was working out here.
Okay.
That's a good movie.
I actually was, you don't happen to know Robert Herring, do you? He was
Oh,
a sheriff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
He was
yeah.
my next door neighbor.
Is he still alive?
He is.
Tell him I said hello, please.
Okay.
Yeah,
He's
I remember
living in-
back in those days when I was the MBN district commander for Northeast, after I stopped working undercover up this way, working with Robert.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's a good guy.
Oh, he is.
that
Yeah.
local?
Tell him I said hello.
Yeah. No, Pusser.
Any other questions or
Were you
comments?
ever injured? Did you escape injury?
I sure did. Look, if it'd been dangerous, I would have quit right away.
Glad you did.
What,
Especially in Gresham, you certainly did.
somebody once asked me, said,
Competition.
did you ever get shot or anything? I told him, you mean you could get shot doing this? No, I didn't. But you know what? One thing about it is, and I would teach new agents how to work undercover too. If you don't know how to work undercover, you can come this close to being shot or being confronted. This close. And if you don't really know how to work undercover, you might be with criminals and talking with them and you're undercover, all that, and then you leave and you don't realize you came that close to somebody shooting you or all of a sudden shoving a gun in your face to find out who you were. You've got to, you really got to know what you're doing to do things. I'm keeping y'all too long. Anything else?
Did you have to write a nonfiction book proposal for that book, or did you?
Normally you do, but I didn't. My neighbor had been published by University Press of Mississippi, and he told them about what I was writing. So one day we went down to Jackson, and I brought a printed out manuscript with me, and then they wanted to go ahead and do it. But of course, it took about a year and a half or 2 years from that point before everything was finally written. But normally, you're right, normally you have to write a proposal. Yeah.
Do you know Charles, do you know Charles Sasser? Charles Sasser. Author.
Charles Sasser? I don't.
No, okay.
But anything else?
Are you ever concerned that somebody might recognize you, or you know?
You know, I've done probably far more than 170 interviews, book talks, and all that. And that question has come up at I think everyone except maybe 2 out of that 170 something. And the answer to that is, well, I've got a couple of answers. Number one, I figure they're all in walkers right now. And if so, my walker is faster than their walker. And the second thing is, well, you know, if somebody wanted to do that, gosh, they've got as much chance of getting hurt as I do, right?
There you go.
And the more serious answer for that is this, is that after doing that for 10 years, doing that for 10 years, and have cock guns stuck in your side and those kind of things that I encountered, why would I be, I don't spend a second worrying about something like, I guess I've got the same attitude I had working undercover. Whatever happens, I'll handle it. And my wife says, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. I got a wife who jump on them.
They might like the glory.
Now, by the way, those who have read Confessions of an Undercover Agent say your wife is the real hero of that book, and she's in it. Although she wasn't meant to be, I wrote about those times where sometimes we had encounters when I was working undercover, unplanned. So she is the real hero.
And our son followed in his footsteps, but just retired about a month ago with
Yeah.
the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we're pleased with him and his career. He retired as an NBA captain. So we're pleased with that. If anybody's interested in the book, I've got Confessions of an Undercover Agent. They're $25, and Whirlwind is $20. And I think I've got some paperbacks of Whirlwind only for $15. Or if you already have a book, I'd be more than happy to do a personal description for you. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate y'all having me.
Thank you so much
All
for
right, thank
speaking
you.
to us.
Thank you.
I think it's great.